next topic, and that is the Cass review. Now, what is the Cass review? The Cass review is set up by a woman called Hilary Cass. I'm just going to check that she is actually called Dr. Hilary Cass, who is the chair of this report. And it's a very, very lengthy report. I haven't, I admit, read it. Dr. Hilary Cass is this lady here on your screens. And Dr. Hilary Cass has put together this independent report. I think parts of it, by the way, that I have been across pander a little bit too much to the extremists on this side of the argument. It tries to be fair and balanced, but I don't think you can be fair and balanced to people that want to do this sort of thing to your children. And I don't think there are enough consequences currently for the people that have pushed children onto these things. But what are these things that I'm talking about? So this review was put together to study gender identity services for children and young people. There was controversy over the Tavistock Clinic, which was the NHS's only gender identity clinic for children. Now, that clinic saw children on sometimes as low as 2 appointments, and after those 2 appointments, placed them on these experimental hormones, puberty blockers, these drugs that aren't tried, aren't tested, and said that they were generally reversible, but they weren't. They're generally irreversible. The consequences that it does to your voice, perhaps your development of your bones even, and of your brain. And some of these other things have come out since then. And then we saw the WPATH leaks, which is the transgender global health body, that found that a young girl had cancer as a consequence of taking some of these drugs. So I think there ought to be serious consequences for anybody that has pushed a child into doing things like wearing breast binders, manipulating their body in any way. But I just want to quickly go through some of the findings from this report. Now, as I just admitted, I haven't been through it, but I did ask, with the help of artificial intelligence, for them to go through it. And I knew that there would be safeguarding concerns from this document and what the evidence is on autism and being lesbian, gay or bisexual. And Claude, which is Amazon's artificial intelligence that they're funding, says, based on my review of the report, there are 2 main areas related to safeguarding concerns and evidence on autism and being lesbian, gay or bisexual. And it says the multi-professional review group continued to be very concerned about the Gender Identity Development Service, which GIDS is its acronym, their lack of apparent professional curiosity or concern in relation to risk and safeguarding. Now, what that means is that basically these are ideologues, plain and simple, right? They don't give a shit about your child's health. They care about actually being seen to be virtuous and progressive and doing all the right things to tick diversity boxes, looking good on social media. It's sick, to be perfectly frank. It says there are examples of issues identified by the MPRG, included increased psychosocial vulnerability, including complex family relationships, situations, illness, addiction, domestic abuse, and online abuse, grooming, isolation, self-harm, suicidality. Now, that's kids who are clearly not well. So I think the last thing they need is to be placed and have their puberty thwarted as a consequence of hating their own body and being unhappy with their general lives. Clinicians described the review how in some cases where the child's gender identity was consciously or unconsciously influenced by the parent, there were some from the NHS Tavistock Clinic that whistleblowers reported saying that there were parents that would come in who were of the Muslim faith, who would say that they preferred a gay outcome, a trans outcome over a gay outcome. So they wanted to trans their kids in order for them not to be homosexual, so that if they were the opposite sex, which you can never do, or they present as it, that they wouldn't be shamed and all the rest of it by having a gay child. The review also heard a series of accounts of children and young people at safeguarding risk being lost to follow-up and or young people presenting to the emergency department with a safeguarding history that staff were unaware of. Do your bloody job, right? The NHS is this big, massive, monolithic beast. All of this data is readily available within the NHS system. And staff were unaware of changes of name and NHS number, so they had no idea who they were talking to, had no idea of the history of this person, and just said, you know what, to hell with safeguarding, ideology is more important. And just very briefly, research studies suggested that transgender and gender diverse individuals are 3 to 6 times more likely to be autistic. Chloe, what do you make?
I think this is absolutely horrifying what you have just read out, and now that this CAS report suggests what I think is the blindingly obvious thing, which is that children coming forwards claim that they are transgender. This should be treated like any other mental health issue. They need help. They need therapy, right? And then there is this link here between autism and someone claiming that they're trans. That should not be ignored. It is a difficult topic to talk about, but I think it's good that this report has identified that. I think what's happened is just absolutely criminal, and I'm glad that this report...
It should be criminal. It should be.
I think that this report is getting the press that it deserves. I'm glad to see it all over the press today. I think that we will look back on this in 10 years' time and be absolutely horrified by what we have done to children.
Alex?
Yeah, I found this whole thing really disturbing, and I've watched a lot of the debates about this today. One of the most important parts of the debate that I've heard is someone turn up and say there are no such thing as a transgender child. There isn't. The transgender children is not a thing.
Same as a vegetarian cat, right?
Exactly. Now, there are people with body dysmorphia. That's different, but that doesn't it's not a category. It's not a sexuality. There are lots of young people who are on TikTok, on social media, that are seeing a lot of these ideologues talk about this group and this tribe that they're creating, this trans tribe, of people like Dylan Mulvaney, who are basically cosplaying as women, which is highly insulting to women, but are also encouraging young people to withhold this information about their gender from their parents, and instead, and we've got that possible law going through where schools will be able to withhold that information from parents too. So these kids, these young people who are really struggling, clearly really struggling with self-identity, and a lot of young people do, particularly gay and LGBT young people do.
Especially autistic children as well, Alex.
You're right. You're absolutely right. But there is a very interesting correlation that I think the audience would like to know, which is, guess what country in the world has the highest transgender surgery? It's Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Iran. It takes the unlikely spot as the country with the most transgender surgery. And that's because a lot of as you said, Darren, a lot of the parents, and particularly Muslim community, would rather have a trans person than a gay person. So it's a really disturbing trend to see this. It's life-changing surgery that can never be undone. And a lot of these young people go to commit suicide in their early 20s. It's
the
very
Kira Bell
disturbing.
case, the Kira Bell case where she won that landmark case and said that they should never have done this to her, and or allowed her to say that she wanted to do it to herself because she was a vulnerable child. And the BBC, it's one of the best things the BBC have done, and I don't say that very often, was the BBC Newsnight expose on the NHS Tavistock Clinic, and it changed everything for me. It was eye-opening. It was just, I couldn't believe this was happening. I do believe it now, obviously. Hilary Casp clearly believes it too, and this independent report makes it absolutely clear. But Chloe, have you got any faith whatsoever that actually we're going to see safeguarding placed ahead of ideology, this trans ideology, when it comes to our children? Because Slim says on YouTube, it will go on as long as there is money to be made from it. And I'm afraid to say there is a vested interest here, which is pharmaceutical companies who will make lots of money if there are lots of trans children who are blocking their puberty.
So, a couple of things to say about that. I would like to be slightly optimistic and think that now that this report has come out and now that the NHS, we've seen them make some moves against this kind of behaviour with them banning puberty blockers and closing down the Tavistock clinic, I would like to think that at least in this country, the tide is starting to turn against this. However, I am very concerned about America, where profit is even more pertinent in the medical industry there, where you've got doctors and pharmaceutical companies making hundreds of thousands of dollars off of these kids from transing them, giving them all these hormone blockers, and then they know that it is it's a trajectory that they start them on the trajectory and then they keep on getting more money from them because you start them on hormone blockers, and then soon enough you'll convince them to get surgeries and whatnot, and you'll get more and more money out of them, and that for me is really concerning. And we are just experimenting on kids. I just wanted to go back to the puberty blockers, because I know you mentioned some of the adverse side effects of this, and you mentioned things like your bones not developing properly and stuff, but it's even worse than that. Obviously we have limited evidence on this because it's a fairly new phenomenon, but the evidence that we do have is suggesting that for a lot of people this means that they then remain infertile for the rest of their lives. Another thing that was interesting, it might sound a bit funny, but I think it's important to bring up, is some people who are given hormone blockers, puberty blockers, they then are never able to orgasm again in their entire life, as well as being completely infertile, which
I just want to add on to the back of what you're saying there, Chloe, because the LGB societies, these organizations, these so-called charities have a lot to answer for. They have been putting out publication after publication in schools, mermaids and otherwise, Stonewall and otherwise. They have been putting out these publications to young people in schools, and it is messing with their heads. And these so-called activists who are now bored because they have equality to the max, if not they have privilege. There's a lot of privilege in the gay society now. They have a new battle because they can't just be happy with getting what they want. They now have to find a new authority to battle. They are a plague on our nation. Those societies, an absolute plague.
It's what Douglas Murray describes as the St. George syndrome, where St. George has slayed the dragon and now he goes around mercilessly killing sheep because he's got nothing else to fight. And I'm afraid that children have become the sheep, and the trans crusade, the latest crusade. Now, Arlie, I just want to give a little shout out to Arlie, because Arlie on YouTube has said, who is trans, by the way, has been commenting along to this, and I haven't had a chance to respond yet. But Arlie says, truly, seeing what the whole process is like, Arlie says that they went through, I have no idea if it's a man or woman, went through a really rigorous process, and obviously an age-appropriate process with a lot of research and a lot of deep thinking, which obviously strikes me as incredibly pertinent in those kinds of cases. I think you can do what you want to your body, right? I think you, as a consenting adult, call yourself whatever you want, wear whatever you want, but just don't make demands of others, and certainly don't go after children. That's my red line, and I think that's a red line that's pretty accepted throughout the British public. And Arlie says that surgery is not for the faint-hearted. Yeah, and I'm sure Arlie also agrees it ain't for children.
And I just want to add on to the back of this, because we're talking about the NHS a lot these days because it's an election year and Labour want to play it up, of course. I personally believe these surgeries should not be available under the National Health Service. The National Health Service is there to look after sick people. It now has become a menu of things, and actually one of the reasons why children are being targeted. Oh, we've got a comment flying around. One of the reasons why children are being targeted is because there is a part of the rules of the NHS which say if you're a young person suffering from mental health issues that they will perform surgeries that would necessarily not be allowed for adults. So it's really important we talk about how the NHS works as well as part of this conversation.
Yeah, I want to move on, but I want to talk about Ali is male to female, by the way, and he says, I know I'll never be truly female, but it helps the dysmorphia. I just don't want others to ever experience this. And I think that I really welcome that kind of interaction and that kind of discourse. And I thank you, Ali, for being part of the conversation today. But Annette says it's and for some reason I managed to make Annette's comment absolutely huge. But Annette says it's criminal, Chloe. It's an ideology again, and it's taking advantage of vulnerable children who feel they don't belong to society. They need help with often physiological problems. It's psychological, autism, and it's all of the depression and all these other things. You have such as Stonewall, etc., making a fortune out of this. Yeah, that's true. Like Black Lives Matter, etc. It's a real grift. The long-term repercussions of this for these children is very sad. It's heartbreaking, and I think it ought to be criminal, Annette. We need the government to bring laws in to stop this and not just guidelines. At least it's come out into the open now. Yeah. But, I mean, just very briefly then, in a word, would both of you like to see criminal sanctions to those who have pushed this, especially in the NHS?
Absolutely. Yes. But what I want to say is also, as well as having the laws in place, is making sure that they are enforced and making sure that they're thorough and there are not loopholes that can easily be got around. Because what we saw was that these sort of dodgy online private clinics found a loophole where kids could order puberty blockers online without their parents even knowing and without them ever even seeing in person through some legal loophole. That is terrifying. So there needs to be laws, but they need to be properly enforced, and they need to make sure that they cover everything so that these kind of loopholes can't be exploited.
Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk, and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.